Look at that. Holy moly. Look at that. Hold up. Stop the presses. As my review was about to go live today, I had a statement come through from OPPO saying, I'll just read it verbatim, "At OPPO, we carefully tailor our product launches to each region based on in-depth market research, strategic priorities. The Find N5 will not be launching in Europe, and therefore, I guess, by the UK. Instead, in Q1 2025, we will introduce the Reno 13 series across Europe on February 24th. Well, that's hugely disappointing. We were strongly led to believe the Find N5 would be getting a global launch. Even The Verge's review, which I just checked among other ones, all say, yes, it's not coming to the US, but the UK and Europe get it. It's a global launch. They even had a London briefing. And obviously at the launch event of the N5, they gave Singaporean pricing, 2,499 SGD, but they were a little bit quiet on what it would be elsewhere. And it turns out there is no elsewhere. So I suppose except for Singapore, China, and maybe a handful of countries in Asia, no one else will be able to buy an N5, which is even more disappointing, not just because I spent about 2 weeks making this video, which is still valid, by the way, everything I say in this review, so hopefully you still stick around and watch the rest of it, but also because the OnePlus 2 has been effectively cancelled, so Samsung and Honor and Vivo will be very happy about this. I still maintain this is the best foldable phone, and I was going to say that you can buy, but now asterisk that you probably can't buy. Hopefully you still enjoy the video. This is the new OPPO Find N5. It's a sunny day in London and this doesn't happen very often over winter, so I brought myself outside. We're in Trafalgar Square right now. But I want to talk about this, the N5, because while I don't know how many people actually buy foldable phones, clearly enough because they keep making them, and this doesn't fundamentally fix any of the issues that you have with a foldable, being very expensive, and also, how often do you actually utilize this tablet screen if you want to watch movies and things? It's letterbox. So this is not for everyone, but if you fancy yourself a bit of a pro user and fancy having a tablet you could put in your pocket, well, hands down, this is the best foldable you could buy right now. Although that is cheating a little bit because it's also the first flagship foldable launch we've had in 2025. So what makes this N5 so special? Well, I think firstly it's the successor to one of my all-time favorite foldables, the OnePlus Open. This actually came out in 2023. It has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. It's quite chunky actually, but I really love this phone, and we haven't had a successor, a sequel, until now with the N5. Now sadly it has been confirmed that we won't be getting a OnePlus Open 2. Instead, OnePlus is basically just putting all their weight behind their parent company's phone with the OPPO N5, because the N3 and the Open were basically the same phone, just rebadged for different territories. Except for the fact that this runs Color OS rather than Oxygen OS, in all but name this is the OnePlus Open 2, which is why immediately I'm very excited by it. It's also the first flagship foldable of 2025, which means this packs in the Snapdragon 8 Elite. It's the first foldable phone to offer the latest chip from Snapdragon, although it is a slightly lower power version. They've actually dropped, or perhaps even just disabled, one of the cores, so the actual multi-core score will be a little bit lower compared to other Snapdragon 8 Elite phones, but otherwise they're identical. Same graphics, same NPU, same ISP for the camera, and I think it was the smart choice to balance that performance with efficiency and power consumption thermals, given this form factor. So it's the successor to the OnePlus Open. It has the latest Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. It's also the thinnest book-style foldable on the market. Technically, the Huawei Trifold, when unfolded, is a little bit thinner, but this beats everything else out there, including what you get from Vivo and Honor, and especially Samsung. Next to the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6, it's about a third thinner. That really is crazy, given that these are direct rivals, and in many ways, this is a superior phone. They've barely been able to squeeze in the USB-C port there. You can see how thin that frame is around it. This is actually 4.21 millimeters when open, compared to 5.6 millimeters on the Galaxy Z Fold 6. It's a good deal thinner, as you can see. So it's thinner, it's also 10 grams lighter than the Fold 6, and while also giving you more screen space. You can see the overall footprint is actually a little bit bigger than the Fold 6. Nothing wrong with the Fold 6, but just in terms of having the biggest screens in your pocket, you can't go wrong with the M5. And crucially, when it comes to folds, that bloody thing in the middle, the crease, which has made foldables a bit uncomfortable to use since their inception with the original Galaxy Fold. Obviously, every generation they have improved, and the Fold 6 is a little bit better than the Fold 5. But side by side with the N5, firstly, you can see that anti-reflective screen doing its work, reducing my studio light, but you can also see how much less obvious, how much more subtle that crease is This is, hands down, the most impressive, and by impressive I mean most subtle, crease I've ever used on a foldable. The Magic V3 and also Vivo's X Fold 3 Pro, whatever it's called, are very similar, but this, I think, just takes the win, and also is noticeably slimmer in terms of width than the original OnePlus Open, the N3. So on the outside, you have this comfortable 6.62-inch screen with a pretty regular smartphone form factor aspect ratio, and it's a good deal wider than even the new Fold 6. But then it opens up to this massive 8.12-inch tablet screen, essentially a square as most of these foldables are when they open up. And actually, this is the biggest foldable you can get in terms of the outer and the cover screen. And apparently, this even has a slightly bigger surface area than an iPad mini. Although bear in mind, that's probably a third of the price of this, so you could buy an iPhone and an iPad. Anyway, the point is it's all in one, and obviously you are paying a premium for the fact that it folds into a regular smartphone form factor. So this is the black model, but it also comes in a white, which I do think is a little bit more eye-catching than this. It's obviously quite subtle and nice, and you also have this black aluminium frame around the outside. I would personally go for the white one if I was going to buy this myself. And overall, it's a very smart looking foldable. My only complaint is just how high the volume rocker and the power is up here on the right-hand side of the phone. The power button also doubles as a fingerprint reader, so you really have to sort of finger your way up, that sounds weird, to the power button, and even higher for the volume rocker, which is right up the top of the phone. Couple of other thoughts since I've been using this on the design. The speakers aren't the best I've used. They are lacking a little bit in bass and richness. They're fine, they're not bad by any stretch, but just not the best speakers. Similarly, the haptic motor in here is actually quite weak, even compared to other OPPO phones, compared to other foldable phones. So the haptic feedback, the vibration, just a little bit weak, let's just say. And if you're thinking, oh, well, that's all lovely, Tom, but what about an S Pen, a stylus? The Fold 6 has one of those. Well, so does this. You also have to buy it separately, as you do with the Fold 6, but this supports the OPPO Pen. So if you do want to have more refined doodles and drawing and utilize the space for some artsy, creative stuff, then you can buy the OPPO Pen and use it with this.
Now, obviously, the main selling point of a foldable is a big old tablet screen, but I also love the fact that you have the front cover screen, particularly for taking photos, and if you are by yourself or taking a group selfie, what you can do in the camera app is do the cover screen preview. That's not new, of course, but we've also got full cover screen control, so it brings the whole UI to the front outer screen, and then you can use a little palm gesture to take a photo or start recording, or you can use the volume down or the regular button like that. So being able to frame yourself, use palm gestures, and then take a selfie or a group photo with the high quality rear cameras and not rely on these not so good selfie cameras. One of my absolute favorite things about having a foldable.
As for the screens themselves, they both look lovely. They have 1 to 120 Hz dynamic refresh rates, 2160 Hz PWM, so it's actually a little bit more comfortable for your eyes, particularly at lower brightnesses. Both screens support Dolby Vision and HDR10+, and the inner tablet screen also has this anti-reflective coating, which helps reduce reflections and glare and actually makes it a lot easier to use outside. The cover screen can get a touch brighter, but the internal tablet screen does have the anti-reflective coating. Obviously, the main worry when you have a foldable this thin and light and also this expensive is durability. I've only had this for a couple of weeks, so I will continue to use it and report back in a longer term review, but so far so good. I've been opening it with my hand like this all day long and there's been no problems. I wouldn't really recommend that, but I just want to see if it actually breaks. And they've actually improved the toughness of both the screens, with the outer screen now 20% stronger for drop resistant and 10% more scratch resistant, whilst the inner screen is 70% stronger with a new anti-shock film, which apparently improves shock resistance by 70%.
They've also beefed up the water resistance. We've got IPX6, IPX8, and new for this year, IPX9, so it can withstand hot jets of water. Still no dust resistance though, which is a bit frustrating given that's probably the main thing you'd be worried about with these kind of phones, dust ingress, but certainly this is incredibly water resistant. To the point where I feel comfortable being in Trafalgar Square got a few looks doing that, no problem at all.
So it's the thinnest, it's the lightest, it has the most subtle crease, it has the new chip, and therefore it's the fastest foldable you can buy right now, even with that one reduced multi-core, and also it's the coolest. I actually ran a big foldable battery test the other day. Not only was the new N5 the coolest phone in terms of exterior peak temperature after playing a game for 15 minutes compared to the rest of these guys, but it also had the best battery by some margin. Despite the size of this, OPPO have crammed in a 5600 mAh battery, which actually is a little bit smaller than what Vivo has in theirs, but presumably with the more efficient Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, this actually lasts about an hour longer than even the Vivo, which comes in second place. But the N5 was still the clear winner, and actually lasted about 25 to 30% longer than the Open, the N3.
I mean, the engineering behind this thing is just incredible. This is one of the batteries, their silicon carbon battery design, but it's just 2.1 millimeters thick. And with a dual cell design, this adds up to a 5600 mAh battery. With support for 80-watt SuperVOOC wired charging, and impressively, despite how thin this is, they have managed to add support for wireless charging. In fact, up to 50-watt AirVOOC charging if you splash out for one of their chargers. It's an optional extra, of course. However, the phone doesn't have magnets in it. There's not enough room for them, so while this is fine if it's laid flat, it will just slide off because it hasn't got magnets. So what you'll want to do is buy the optional extra magnetic wireless charging case, which then will allow you to attach it to, say, MagSafe accessories, and it won't just slide off. Now, for this review sample that I was given, I did get a charger in the box, and it's actually a UK plug, which suggests the UK market may get a charger, but OPPO said that it will vary based on regions where you live, whether you get a charger in the box or not. As with any foldable or flip phone, you have to come in with the expectation that the camera will not be as good as its traditional rectangular counterpart, simply because they do not have the same room to fit in the same sensors. Essentially, we have a triple camera setup, a 50 megapixel main, as well as an 8 megapixel ultra-wide and a 50 megapixel 3x telephoto zoom. Plus a couple of, well, pretty rubbish 8 megapixel cameras for the selfie and the tablet screen. So while this borrows the same main camera as the OPPO X8, which is very good, it's not at the level of an X8 Pro, the sensor is smaller. We do also have a pretty decent 50 megapixel telephoto, which gives us a 3x zoom and a 6x lossless zoom, and they've also now added their AI telescope zoom, so when you go beyond 10 times, it uses more AI and processing to improve the images, and actually longer range zoom is very good for a foldable. And they've also introduced a tele-macro photo mode, so you can get some nice, really close-up photos using the zoom camera. What isn't so good is the ultra-wide camera. It's borderline bad, especially in lower light. 8 megapixels, f2.2, it does support autofocus, but generally image quality from this ultra-wide is pretty poor. It's certainly the weakest point of this camera system. I suppose the good news though, at least for me, is that that's the lens that I use the least. And the main camera and the telephoto are actually very good. I would say they're comparable with the Galaxy Fold 6, and in some cases actually a little bit better. But you be the judge. Let me show you a whole bunch of side-by-sides shot on the N5 and also the Fold 6 with the latest software on both. And while they share similar specs for the main camera, the OPPO actually has a much bigger sensor for the telephoto lens, although the Fold does have a much better ultra-wide. The main difference between the two is the color science. And I've also found that the OPPO generally gives us a slightly more contrasty, more shadowy look, which you may prefer. It's more cinematic, more filmic, more vibey. I would say that the main cameras are comparable. They're basically on par in terms of performance. But I would also say the Fold 6 is significantly better for the ultra-wide, but then the OPPO is slightly better in terms of portraits and zooming in. Although I have found for longer range portraits, sometimes the blur, the bokeh can be a little bit off, and actually the Samsung does a better job. As for video, well, let's kick off with a poem, which was very kindly written by this gentleman hanging out in Trafalgar Square. I did pay him £20 for his service, and I said, make me a poem, write me a poem about a foldable phone. And this is what he came up with. Feel free to pause the video and have a full read through if you like, but it's very profound. As for video quality, well, generally it's pretty good, especially if you have nice lighting. I'm just panning around Trafalgar Square here, lovely light, and it looks good, it's sharp, colors are natural, but I have found in trickier lighting conditions, the quality can drop quite significantly. By far the worst aspect of the camera though is, you guessed it, the ultra-wide, which doesn't even let you shoot 4K 60, tops out at 4K 30, and the quality is just pretty awful, so I never really end up using it. The video quality isn't quite what I expected, and actually I thought it looked better watching it back on the phone screen, but then also put it on my laptop and edit it into this video. I was a little bit less impressed. Zooming in, the stabilization is actually better than I expected, but even just casually walking, there's always this vibration. There's also no option to shoot in 8K, which isn't the end of the world, but it would have been nice if we had the ability to shoot in log, which you can do on the iPhone, the S25, and Xiaomi phones. You can record in Dolby Vision HDR, but as I say, there's no log option here. So in terms of the N5's overall camera quality, I'd say photos, 8 out of 10, video, 7. So both these foldables offer good camera systems, but as I say, they are not as good as their rectangular traditional counterparts. If you do want the absolute best camera, then get yourself an S25 Ultra or a OPPO X8 Pro. So this is running Android 15 with OPPO's Color OS on top. As I say, I do prefer Oxygen OS, which we got on the OnePlus Open, but well, that's not happening. But I must admit, this is still very nice to use, and it's actually quite optimized for a foldable like this. For example, if I open Google Maps over here, I can then swipe down 2 fingers to bring up split view. I could then say bring up Instagram, nice, side-by-side app like that. I can swap sides, I can do a top-bottom split. And if I bring up either the taskbar or the edge sidebar here, I can then bring in a third app, and now I have what they call boundless view with these 3 apps in split screen, which I can jump between. And you can also save your app layouts onto the desktop here. So then with a single press, I have the layout of the apps that I like. You've got this app library and recent files, which open up on top of any other app you're using. So you can open a file, you can drag a photo into a specific app. And as usual for foldables like this, there are a handful of apps that take advantage of flex mode. And this also comes in handy for the new OPPO Connect, which actually now lets you have a full remote desktop from your Mac on your phone. So the bottom side of the screen can be your keyboard or a trackpad with a display on the top half. This OPPO Connect may just be one of my favorite features because I do use a MacBook as my main work laptop, and one of the advantages, of course, of using an iPhone is AirDrop and the continuity between all that hardware and software. But with OPPO Connect, I can remotely access my phone from my Mac and then drag and drop files and photos, and now you have access to a full remote desktop feature, although I think this is currently in beta, and it does take a few minutes to set up the first time you do it. There's lots of permissions you have to grant. So to share photos and files via OPPO Connect, you do need to be on the same Wi-Fi network as the laptop. However, the remote control only requires that they're both connected to the internet. They don't have to be on the same network. You've also got Google's Gemini baked in, the AI assistant, which you can open up via a long press of the power button. And of course, there's a whole bunch of AI for you to play with, whether you're AI erasing in the photo gallery or removing reflections or you're summarizing notes, the usual kind of stuff that you would expect on a new phone. I also appreciate it supports eSIMs and Wi-Fi calling, neither of which are guaranteed from Chinese phones. More importantly though, is the software support, and OPPO promised 4 years of OS upgrades with a 5th year of security, so we are getting some nice support from OPPO, although not the 7 years that you get from Samsung. As for all important pricing, what we do know is it will cost $2,500 in Singapore.
If you did stick around for that entire review, even though you know that you can't buy this, well, I appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and hopefully it was useful for you guys. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.